I'm Dr. Jett, and I've had a passion for public health for over 30 years. Now I'm in a position to affect change, and these are the critical conversations about health and our community, with people who can help me make those changes. Good morning. Welcome to CEO Live Talks. I'm your host, Dr. Jett, and today I have the all famous Miss Nikki Lanier. I should say doctor. She has a Juris Doctorate. Everybody don't know that. But welcome to the set.
Thanks. Thanks, Doc.
Let's get it in proper standing today.
All right.
You know, I want to know a little bit about your background. Now, and I'm talking about where you grew up at, because you was in Missouri, then you traveled a little bit to Hampton. But
it's a whole bunch.
Give me a little bit of that sauce of what made you you.
The full tapestry. All right. So you're right. I was born in Jeff City, Missouri, but I regard myself as being from Hampton.
Okay.
My parents moved around a whole bunch, but we stayed the longest in Hampton. Okay. And in fact, I grew up on Hampton University's campus. My parents were professors. So, and then I graduated from Hampton. I matriculated at Hampton, and then I went to law school in Miami, and did labor and employment law down there for a couple of years. HR, really the bulk of my career, though. So I worked for all kinds of companies, public sector, private, East Coast, West Coast, big employers.
So you done got it in.
Listen, and then some. The stories I could tell. Oh, the stories I could tell. And then I moved to Louisville. I've lived here twice.
Okay.
Came in 2000 and worked for a bunch of employers, chief among them, like Humana and ADP. I worked for Mr. Johnson, Charlie Johnson, for a little bit. And then I worked for state government as a cabinet secretary. Then I left and moved to Arizona, of all places, and then back to Florida, and then back here.
So let's unpackage this, because you said something that was very interesting. Both of your parents were professors. I know your mother was English.
Yep.
And what did your father teach?
Business.
Okay. And what impact did that have on you? Because it is very rare to have two parents in the household that are professors.
Yeah.
And being African American. Right?
Right.
So
yeah,
walk me through that growing up.
And being on a HBCU.
Right.
On the campus, right?
On the campus.
My upbringing was very much like Cosby Show-esque. So my parents were very gregarious, larger than life personalities, and extraordinarily potent in their own field academically. But because we lived on campus, Wanda, we had like our house was a gathering spot. So after work, you had the dean of this school and the chair of this department and all the professors. They would congregate at our home. And my parents were big wine and cognac drinkers. And so they would just be pontificating with their friends, drinking all this wine.
They were socialites.
The whole thing.
Right.
The whole thing, with jazz playing in the background. But almost always the topic of conversation was the state of Black America.
Okay.
And the plight of Black people, and the academic prowess of Black people, and pride. I mean, it was just incredible to watch. I was the only child. I said, well, it's like there's still hope.
Yeah, right.
I am an only child.
Might want to let that go.
Right. I am an only child. So I was just always tethered to my parents. So where they went, I went. And I was just absorbing all of that, my entire upbringing. And it was just incredible.
So you play any sports?
No.
No, you had time. You was studying.
I was too busy reading and writing and trying to do what was right.
It must be the English teacher, boy, that was tough. So, because I already could imagine.
Yeah.
They used to hit your hand with a ruler back in the day.
Oh, listen, I had elocution classes. Yeah. My mother had me walk around with books on my head to make sure that my posture was right. I mean, I couldn't wear pants until I was in high school. It was a whole thing.
It was a whole thing.
It was a whole mess.
She was strict.
Middle school was a mess.
What did your daddy say?
What are you going to say? He just tried his best to stay out the way, you know.
Poor Pops.
Poor Pops, I know.
No wonder he was sipping on the cognac.
Right.
It's like stress.
It was a lot.
Look at that, my little daughter. But you were spoiled, though, so.
Yeah. I mean, I think so, probably. Okay.
So why not grow up and be a professor? I mean, because you had the genes and everybody around you and full time at Hampton.
Yeah.
I mean, because that's a legacy.
It is legacy. I would argue in some ways I am. because my gift, I think spiritual and otherwise, is conveying knowledge and teaching and bringing inspiration and trying to be influential through what I can impart to help illuminate like new realities for people.
Right.
And in some ways that's teaching, but just not in the classroom.
Not in the classroom.
No.
Teaching the youth. Because we need somebody to follow behind us.
Yeah.
Right? That's one thing that's missing. We're not teaching the younger generation. Which in some parts is sad. I try to do my part.
Right.
I teach. I haven't taught now probably about a year or so. I need to get back in the classroom. So tell me about Hampton, because you was at HBCU.
Yes.
I almost went to Hampton.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, you should have just come on.
I had an architectural scholarship
Oh my
to
goodness.
go to Hampton. And at the time I said, do you have a full ride for football? It was like, no.
Oh, okay. Well, that did it.
That did it.
Yeah, but that did it.
Yep.
Hampton was an incredible opportunity, an incredible incubating space. I mean, I think HBCUs in general, but for me, being at Hampton, maybe because I was from Hampton, there was just a different orientation and a different familiarity, honestly.
And you couldn't get away with nothing because you had two parents.
You can't get away
campus.
with, well, theoretically, you're right.
Right.
You should have, that should be the case, but, there's some stories to tell.
Yeah.
But I had a full college experience.
So tell me about why did you decide to go into law? What created that journey?
Law, actually, it was pure happenstance. I had no real desire to practice law. After I graduated from college, I just honestly couldn't find a job. I was a broadcast journalism major.
Right.
I did 0 internships in broadcast journalism during my college years. And so after I graduated, I put in a few applications and didn't really find anything that stuck. So my father told me I got one of 2 options. You go to law school, you go to grad school. So I took the GMAT, is that what's called? GRE, whatever. The entrance test for grad school, and I took the LSAT. I scored higher on the LSAT. I applied to 2 schools, got into one of them. Okay. And off I went.
And you got into a good one because you was down in Miami.
I loved it. I did.
You was having a ball doing some
Miami,
great years.
Good Lord. What a backdrop. Like to go to school in Miami.
Yeah, how could you study?
It was rough. It was rough. That first year was rough. But luckily, I mean, there was a great cohort of Black students that came in that year. And we were super, super tight then, still tight to this day. And we made sure that we were going to get through these 3 years together, and all of us were going to come out of here on time.
Right.
And we were going to do well.
Right. So, because I would have pictured, I could see you being in journalism and actually being a reporter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that would have been neat. But then you go to law.
Right.
Right. With no intent, no practice of law. I mean, but that's how careers happen. Because I understand.
Yeah.
Because my prior life, I was an engineer.
Oh, I did not know that. Oh my gosh, yeah.
So I have a master's in biosystems engineering.
Oh my gosh, okay.
So I've made some shifts in my career. Mm-hmm. I found different paths. So walk me through, like, you practiced a little bit.
Yep.
And then you sort of made a shift.
Yes.
So tell me, what does that look like? Because a lot of people don't understand, like, you started in one area, then all of a sudden your career shifted this way.
Yeah. And it has been shifting. So so my career is far from linear. So when I got into law school, and again, because remember, my rooting is I came from a household that was uniquely, I think, and unapologetically focused on the Black empowerment kind of foundation that has informed my parents' life and, of course, mine. And so from that, and being birthed and inculcated in a Black school, and then I went to the University of Miami, and I was granted it was a fellowship to study law the summer before law school started, and it was called JMJ, so James Weldon Johnson Summer Institute for Black Students. So in that program, I met all these amazing Black students from all over the world who were coming into law school, and we spent a lot of time, again, kind of coalescing around the state of Black America, the plight of Black folks. Rodney King trial was in full swing at that time. So we were just spending a lot of time unpacking and focusing on that. And so that helped to cement the way that I traversed my entire law school career, which was uniquely focused on the plight of Black folks. Okay. And then I also got a chance to work with one of our professors who was doing a lot of work on the Haitian-Cuban dichotomy, who gets political asylum, who doesn't. So I got a chance to work with him on helping more Haitian immigrants secure political asylum. So it was very much a rooting around what's the intersection of policy and belief systems around the value of Black and brown people. And like, so all of that began incubating. So I left that and went into labor and employment law.
Right.
Makes perfect sense. So I did a lot of work in the area of discrimination and harassment. And then moved into HR, which is a kind of an interesting segue, right? It makes sense.
It makes sense.
So I did labor and employment minus the law.
Right.
In HR. So that's really the bulk of my career. And then I did, as you may know, a couple of years with the Federal Reserve, which is another departure.
Yeah, that's another right shift there. I wouldn't even go there because I would have stayed right here with HR.
Yeah.
Because HR and law is it's an interesting mix because you're focused in now on cultural change, DEI.
Yeah.
And I'm highly critical when people say, hey, I want to change the culture.
Yep.
And then, well, how do we go about doing that? And I need some matrix.
Yep.
Right? So,
yeah.
Walk me through Harper Slade and what do you present to a company and some of the things that you have done in order to help people change their culture, bring about diversity, bring about inclusion.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So yeah.
Can I start? I'll answer your question.
You can
I
start
promise.
wherever you want to
Let
go.
me just back up to the HR because it feeds into the way that I approach my work now with Harper Slade. So the bulk of my career has been in HR, and because I've worked for so many kinds of industries and so many different organizations with people from all over the country who hail from their own kind of idiosyncratic communities. Mm-hmm. A couple of things that I learned about work. First of all, because it's a place that we all go to, it is extraordinarily powerful in terms of what it feeds us. It could literally bring life or death.
Correct.
And figuratively. It can restore, it can deplete, it can affirm, it can detract. It feeds our sense of self in ways that sometimes we don't want to admit, and our standing in the world and our worth.
Right.
And so what happens in work oftentimes impacts how we go home and parent, how we show up in our homes with our spouses, how we show up in community. So I've always, when I was doing HR work, I saw it as stewardship work, not necessarily the stuff and things of HR, like the payroll and the benefits. I was really more interested in the psyche around the human dynamic, when and where we can find our way toward feeling safe at work, feeling whole, feeling seen, feeling valued, and what's activated when that happens.
Right.
And from there I moved to the Federal Reserve, which is a whole different body of work, and I did macroeconomics and monetary policy. Go figure, whole different thing. But again, my rooting, my brain takes me almost always to the most marginalized, to the most disenfranchised in any way that I effectuate my work. So that's what I did with the Fed. I helped kind of think about how do we cost out the realities around racism. How much does it cost the country to be racist? Right. And how much does exclusion cost at the macro level, not the micro? So now to your question, Harper Slade.
It costs a lot.
It is $16 trillion.
Right, it costs a lot.
It lost GDP for the last 20 years, and it's $5 trillion each year that we're not able to realize real reckoning around it. But okay, so Harper Slade is a firm that I founded last year, and our focus is on racial equity, helping organizations cultivate an environment where Black and brown talent can thrive. So we know that after 2020, companies far and wide were just clamoring for diversity, for more representation. We have to get more folks in the door who are not white, who are not male, who are not able-bodied, who may not be heterosexual. Okay, so we just start grabbing folks and plucking them inside of environments that just never contemplated them to begin with. So that's a recipe for, right. So that's a good point, Swanee. So I think, the desire for DEI, the demand for DEI outpaced the desire for it.
Right.
And that's always a challenge. And on top of that, we don't have a lot of sophistication with regard to what must be changed in each one of us, every human being, in terms of how we assign value to Black and brown bodies. So my work is I'm not the consultant that you call in to say, how many Black folks do we need? How many Hispanic folks? How many this? I'm the consultant you call in to say, how do we cultivate the environment so that when we recruit more judiciously and more thoughtfully, and when we're thinking about all of the systems, all of the human resources transactions that our employees experience, we recognize that those experiences are almost always different for people who are different. How do we attack that? How do we unpack that? How do we interrogate it? How do we assess it? How do we analyze it and reset it so that we are forever recasting a new normal for how humans who are darker experience the workplace?
This episode of CEO Live Talks is brought to you by Park National Bank. Pay with confidence. Your Park debit card is the fast, safe, smart way to pay this holiday season. Get more details online at parknationalbank.com.
If you or someone you love is considering therapy, contact the professionals at Park Duval Community Health Centers today.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
Communities in our name.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
You're always on time.
Because we serve the community.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
Park Duval Community Health Center, providing quality health care, one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here for them.
Park Duval Community Health is right here for your children's primary care. At Park Duval Community Health Center, our team of highly dedicated pediatric physicians administers state-of-the-art care right here, every day. Because serving the community is more than part of our name, it's our mission. Park Duval Community Health Center, providing quality health care, one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time.
At Park Duval, we offer a variety of services for behavioral health needs, such as therapy, medication management, case management, and we also have community health workers. Here at Park Duval Community Health Center, in our behavioral health department, we provide you with the tools to help improve your life and your mental health. If you or someone you know is experiencing thoughts of suicide, please don't hesitate to give the Suicide Prevention Hotline a call. This could save your life or someone else's life.
You look at performance of a company, and I do know through research that the more diverse it is, the more high performing it is, especially when it's at the board level, right? Because you're bringing in different experiences. But you do have to lay the foundation to have the appropriate culture so that I feel like I'm at home.
Yep.
Right? You can cultivate my growth. And now you recruit the right person, not just a minority, not just a black and brown, but the right person most qualified for the job.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, and I've had this conversation, I can't tell you how many times, that companies, I say we, but companies will go just try to fill a seat, right? Or they'll put somebody in charge. I had a friend not that long ago, was in one particular position, and they said, well, we're going to attach you with DEI, and we want you to cultivate our culture. And I said, well, what does that mean? But the other part is, do you have that expertise?
Yeah, yeah.
Right? Instead of somebody giving you a tag or,
yeah. And well, the expertise is one thing. There's the what and how, I think, of DEI that is really must be carefully constructed, because fundamentally, each of those letters, D and E and I, by themselves are disruptive.
That's correct.
And they're counterintuitive to the way that we've lived our lives for hundreds of years. Together, like they're presented DEI as though it's one swath, one singular doctrine with one singular resource outlay.
It don't work like they do it.
It's right. So you really have to be, in my opinion, a fairly judicious and thoughtful and strategic strategist to be able to do this work inside of a culture or some sort of leadership leaning that says we'll support the disruption that you bring. And so what I worry about sometimes is that when we have all these Black and brown folks who are put into DEI positions and who, for the most part, are the first time a leader has emerged of color in that company, and the doctrine that they are now espousing and promulgating is also the first of its kind. Both that leader and what they're trying to sell are in foreign territory. They're in hostile territory. And so you find that, like, I know a lot of my clients, the DEI folks, are just beleaguered. I mean, they're exhausted because they're in constant justify, defend, sell, explain before they even get to the work. And because the organization believed that it is one doctrine that one person can just kind of move forward and
Very
not really
symbolic.
understanding.
Very symbolic. You know, that probably is the main thing that concerns me nowadays, is no different than bringing in a head coach, saying you in charge of this mission and no support.
Right.
Right? But we want to see you succeed.
Yeah.
But there's no buy-in from anybody at the top layer, right? And then after 2 years, the person is gone because they burned out.
Yep.
So I'm gonna ask you a tough question now.
Okay.
Because you've been in the field a long time. How bad, or what's the worst situation you have dealt with in terms of racism in a company?
Personally? I think I've not had issues of like acuity, meaning going to work and being bombarded with messages like being called the N-word or feeling isolated or feeling dejected. But what I've had almost always throughout my career is the cumulative daggers that, in my opinion, are just as damaging, if not more. And those are things like the messages around how much of a fit you're not, how unacceptable the way that you walk, talk, eat, sit, dress is, how I've been accused of being intimidating and arrogant and unapproachable, not a team player. And these are all the kinds of monikers that most Black folks, especially Black women, get in the workplace. I mean, this is thematic in terms of the brand that's assigned to us.
Right.
And so over time, it compromises how much I can give to my workplace, which is actually the workplace's issue, not mine.
Right.
Right. I mean, I've got to reckon with it.
But you feel the burden.
You do. You feel it, and it's hurtful. I mean, there's no way around it. It's anger-inducing, but it's also hurtful, especially inside of what should be a cocoon of some level of safety.
Right.
At the very least, when I go to work, I want to know that I am seen, heard, valued for who I am, and not constantly being pressured to become something more palatable to my white coworkers and my white employer. And so that's, I think, the challenge that most of us feel in many workplaces, especially workplaces that sit inside of segregated cities like Louisville.
And so I hear this from time to time. My wife says she speaks in a soft voice because she didn't want to be perceived as the angry Black woman.
Yeah.
So,
yep.
What about you? Has that attack came at you?
Yeah,
because that's very specific.
Yeah, so I mean, pentameter, like how loud is too loud in terms of what's considered professional here, where how expressive is too expressive in terms of what's considered professional here. Things that, quite frankly, are oftentimes associated with us, rightfully so. I mean, Black people we're more expressive with our hands, with our bodies. We laugh with our bodies. We express with our hands more than many other cultures. But that is a signed deficit. So is the way that we speak. We sometimes are louder. We have just a different intonation to the way that we speak, also assigned to be deficit. So what I try to do in my work now is challenge some of the social norms and the presumptions in which they sit, and this belief system that there is only one way to show up in the workplace, and that usually is the white way. Because it is the palatable way, and it is a way that from which a lot of our leaders derive comfort. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I've talked to so many people. My husband actually is one that as a black man, he's very expressive and he talks with his hands at work. And he's had feedback from some of his white leaders to ask him to physically sit on his hands when he talks because you're scaring us. So
that is sickening.
Right.
And dumbfounded and sad.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah. And there's such arrogance.
Because you wouldn't ask a white person to do that.
No, because
right. Because you don't feel threatened,
that's it. Okay. That's it. It is happening inside of a black vessel. So anything that happens outside of a black vessel that feels like an expression that is unfamiliar or uncomfortable is by default a threat. So you have to fix it. I don't have to adjust. Yeah. You have to fix it.
Well, tell you a funny story. This was young in my career, and I was shocked when it was brought to my attention. They came to me and they said, people are threatened by your voice.
Yes.
And I said, well, what do you mean? They said, well, your voice is too deep. Can you change the tone of your voice?
Can you?
And I was like, I guess I can change the tone of my voice. How did you?
Right.
Because my next thing is, I'm going to smack the hell out you, but then I'd be angry.
You know what's interesting? So when you look at some studies, the Federal Reserve has done studies on this, as have Mercer and other larger, reputable, very credible HR consulting organizations. Statistically, black people in the context of performance reviews in corporate settings are held to account more often than not for how to correct how people see them.
Right.
Right? So you're intimidating, you need to fix it.
Right.
You're speaking too loudly, you need to fix it. Such and such is uncomfortable with you, you need to go make that relationship work. You're not a team player because so you need to fix. So more often than not, black folks are held responsible for, and therefore our pay, like how we, our compensation, promotional opportunities, of course, tied to performance outcomes. Our performance is more often than not directly related to how white people feel about us, and it is almost always our responsibility to correct us,
right,
to reset who we are in workplaces.
So now with Harper Slade, you are challenging some of those myths. Tell us how you go about doing that.
I'm challenging all of it. And quite frankly, I have to, because our economy is impacted if we don't. So I position this work as an economic imperative, not necessarily or solely a social justice imperative or right thing to do imperative, neither of which, by the way, capitalist systems know what to do with. They're not built to respond to those kinds of arguments. But when you look at the browning of the country, that the country is becoming blacker and browner, not whiter, and by 2045, we will be majority black and Hispanic in the available workforce. That means that black folks and Hispanic folks, our households, must be represented well in at least the middle class in order for the macroeconomic policy, even fiscal policy to work. The way that we think about fiscal policy, monetary policy, super foundation on the health of the middle class. You can't have a healthy middle class if the majority of the available workforce isn't in it.
Right.
So by 2045, the black and brown folks will be, the available workforce got to be a middle class. The biggest impediment to black and Hispanic households moving into and being represented inside of the middle class is the way that we experience racism at work. So that's why I focus really heavily on that E. I do a little bit of D in the I, but I'm on that E all day long, because the absence of focused work on advancing racial equity, black and Hispanic economic mobility, our ability to realize promotional value inside of workplaces and increased income inside of workplaces is critical to the foundational kind of setting of how we think about macroeconomic policy and fiscal policy working. So that's the urgency that I have around it. So I try to frame it in that way so that the employers understand what's at stake.
Well, let me ask a question, and I'm thinking, here's my supposition. If you have more diverse boards and more African Americans and minorities in top leadership positions, does that change the company?
Yes. It changes because of the lived experience. In the same way it has influenced the way that we experience corporations today. White lived experience has absolutely influenced the yeses and nos, the policy frameworks, the strategic imperatives that most companies have realized, and specifically around the valuing of human output. How do we assign value to the output and the productivity of the humans that we employ has largely been discerned by how white people assign value. And it has never contemplated us. They've never had to, for the most part, en masse. Like there's like some episodic instances of that, but en masse, as a matter of course, not the case.
No.
So absolutely, yes, that lived experience and the understanding of how, when you come into a workplace, the narrative that's given to us in this country when we come out of the womb is deficit ridden, and that follows us into the workplace. Black and brown folks understand that. We understand that. And so it is through that understanding that we can discern and, exercise wisdom around how the workplace works.
And so
yes.
I have noticed in my career, and I've led quite a few organizations now. One organization, when I arrived, it was majority white. When I left, it was very diverse, majority African American or minority. 3 years after I left, it had changed back, right? And somebody came to me and they said, well, because I asked the question, what happened? And they said, when you were sitting in the seat, more minorities applied for jobs than ever before.
Yeah.
And they were given opportunities and a fair handshake. Some people even, were hired on that had tried 3 or 4 times, could never get employment.
I believe that.
And when you left, they left, right? Because the culture quickly changed.
Yeah.
And I heard by way of in the streets that a white person felt that more minorities were being hired and they couldn't get promoted because of that. So it astonished me in every stop I've had that more minorities apply because they feel like they had an opportunity. But reflecting back on that, I understood that because I was shut out.
Yep.
So that lived experience made me change hiring practices.
Yeah.
And ensured that, hey, minorities had an opportunity to get those key leadership positions.
Yeah. And even that is counterculture. The idea that we will focus exclusively on amplifying and activating the very population that has only known marginalization, muting, stunting, and diminishment. The idea that we're going to effect that wrong by being intentional and righting it is, it's counterintuitive, and in many populations, some would suggest it's anarchist almost.
Right.
But that is the culture change. Like, that's culture change.
Right.
What happened after you left is the inertia. So
Right.
our inertia leans toward the exclusion of Black and brown.
It's almost like, and somebody made the phrase, which was interesting to me, when President Barack got in office.
Oh my gosh.
And they was like, oh, we got the first Black president, and the country wanted to rebuke later on, and that's how we got President Trump. So we're going to go to the extreme to counter what just occurred.
Yeah.
Because we don't want that culture change.
Yeah.
Right.
It's uncomfortable. I mean, there's no precedent for it.
The depression part, I would get up only because I knew I had to. I'm always having to do stuff for other people, and I can't, who's helping me? Therapy has improved my life by 95%. Every parent, every child, just everyone, just in general, needs some type of therapy, and they should seek it if they feel the need. When I'm approached or have something happen to me, I feel the emotions for everything, But then I have to set it free because it'll do something to me. So I just, like I said, I feel it, not for long, and then I set it free. That's how I've been able to cope with my situations. A closed mouth doesn't get fed. But yeah, once I couldn't take it anymore, and I reached out for help, and I got it.
If you or someone you love is considering therapy, contact the professionals at Park Duval Community Health Centers today.
This episode of CEO Live Talks is brought to you by Park National Bank. Pay with confidence. Your Park debit card is the fast, safe, smart way to pay this holiday season. Get more details online at parknationalbank.com.
If you or someone you love is considering therapy, contact the professionals at Park Duval Community Health Centers today.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
Communities in our name.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
You're always on time.
Because we serve the community.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here.
Park Duval Community Health Center, providing quality health care, one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time.
My Park Duval Community Health Center is right here for them.
Park Duval Community Health is right here for your children's primary care. At Park Duval Community Health Center, our team of highly dedicated pediatric physicians administer state-of-the-art care right here, every day. Because serving the community is more than part of our name, it's our mission. Park Duval Community Health Center, providing quality health care, one person, one family, one neighborhood at a time.
So, as an attorney, how uncomfortable can you make some of these companies feel?
I think the work by definition is uncomfortable. I mean, I think that's the presumption that you have to understand going into it, especially the way that we approach it.
Right.
Because we talk about belief disrupting work.
Right.
Like I'm totally interested in how you grew up, what messages you heard, around the Thanksgiving table about people who look like me and not you. What unique messages you heard around that. I want to know about your experiences. I want to know how well traveled you are, what books you've read. Have you ever been inside of another person's home who's a different color, religion, anything? Have you had any lived experiences, especially inside of an environment where we have no appetite to really understand what, from a policy standpoint, happened to Black people uniquely?
So I have sat in classrooms where we have these discussions.
Yeah.
Right? I've heard some crazy things.
Mm-hmm.
What is the craziest thing that you have heard that you have had to address? And I know it's one that stands out.
I'm trying to think which one. Well, I think one of the things that I've heard was that how I had someone tell me that Black people specifically should welcome opportunities to be disproportionately stopped by the police to demonstrate how we are not like the other Black people. So, why be offended if you don't have drugs in your car, or you don't have guns, or that you don't have some sort of illicit material in your car, because that gives you an opportunity to show the police that you're one of the good Blacks. So we had to address that.
Yeah, speaking of the police department in Louisville and the DOJ report, I saw a lot of things in the report. And so I'm still waiting to hear from the police chief, even though she's becoming acclimated to the city, so she's probably not ready yet to discuss. But how would you change that culture? Because that's a culture that we know. Everybody in the police department, I got a lot of friends there, so there's a lot of good police officers.
Absolutely.
But you have a lot of bad apples.
Yes.
And I'm a firm believer in rooting them out and cutting the virus. But it's a culture, too, that allow the actions to permeate, right, throughout. So walk me through, what does that look like in terms of culture change?
So here's where it's going to get real controversial. I liken it to the Republican Party. And I would say that as a party, think of it as a club. So I'm trying to dilute the potency of the venom around, like, she's talking about politics, right? Just think of it as a club. And if there was an organization called the Republican Party and called a police department in Louisville, and while the organization itself has incredibly valuable tenets that are honorable and, you know, full of fortitude and righteousness, it becomes problematic when there are people who fundamentally believe in kind of I win, you lose. I'm preserved, you're sacrificed. I'm superior, you're inferior. I'm to be amplified and activated, you're to be diminished. When you have those mindsets, finding respite, finding homage, sanctuary inside of organizations like that, more often than not, and quite frankly, statistically more often than any other organization, at some point, the organization, if it's not worked to oust that ideology, becomes the ideology. So that is how I think about policing. While it is clearly we have to have police, we have to have order.
You need it.
We need it, and there are amazing police officers. It is also undeniable that there is something about the marrying of that kind of power and privilege and responsibility with an unfettered, unchecked, unassessed belief that somehow there are differences in who's more human than the other. With a badge, with a gun, that becomes a problem. And so in my opinion, one answer could be, I'm certainly not suggesting that I have the fulsome approach on this, but one answer could be how we go about the recruitment process for police officers in general. I really believe that we need to ask more questions about lived experience, much like we do with our clients. Well-read, well-traveled. How many other people of other cultures have you grown up around? Have you ever been inside of another person? Otherwise, what I'm trying to check for is when it comes to experiencing people who are different from you, are you relying on a narrative or are you relying on lived disruptive experiences that dilute that narrative? Because if it's just the narrative, and we know that the narrative is almost always deficit ridden and negative about Black and brown people, then of course you're going to play that out with badge, gun, and baton and police dog. So
I'm going to take it a different route. If you were punked as a kid, and you never played sports or you never was able to handle your own, now you get a badge and a gun, you feel like you're powerful. But you don't recognize the power that you have, so you tend to abuse it. And if there's nobody around to check it, pull you to the side and say, hey, that action is wrong, then it grows. You're feeding a monster. And I think in certain instances, and this is where it comes back to racial equity and hate. Now you just put somebody who had hate based on race, and they took that action, But sometimes you can have a Black officer take the oppressed view of the white officer and do the same thing.
There's not one among us, I would argue, in this country, maybe even in this world, who has not been taught that Black people are less valuable than white, including Black people. That is a message that we have all been sent. And so I don't think that there's anything that makes us exempt from that. We just have to manage that differently, or our lived experience help mute some of that. So yeah, I mean, I definitely could see where that would happen, but my question still remains, what happens either in the interviewing assessment process and or the onboarding training process to either illuminate that, like how do we, if that's your disposition, your nature, then we need to get that on the table, and somebody got to deal with that before you get on the streets.
I've said this before, even in my leadership, we need to do better screening from the perspective of how you handle certain situations. What is your mental capacity? What do you revert back to at that critical time?
Yeah. Where do you go? That's
where do
right.
you go? Because I want to know where your mind goes, so I know how do you handle situations. And we do the screen in the military, so we can kind of get to the heart of some things.
Yeah.
But I got a chance to see something different from some of my people when I was in Iraq, because some of them came from rural places, wasn't able to handle some of the contact we was in. Some of them did great, but some of them from the urban areas, they had lived experience. So they were able to compartmentalize a little bit different. But I was able to watch and see how people reacted if they begin to have a glazed look in their eyes after a while. And one of the problems we're facing now, especially with all the actions happening with police, is that people are more desensitized to violence and the devalue of life, which is kind of scary.
Yeah.
When you really think about it.
Yeah. It's horrifying.
It's horrifying, but I even think to the extent that we need to give our employees, as we're going through the hiring process, these tests, right? How do you handle stress in key situations? And I thought about this, you know, with the bank shooting just happened, right? So just the stress of, hey, I might be terminated, or I've seen people use guns more with suicides when they hit something critical in their life, and they can't really deal with that. And I think that's one way that we can get to the heart of changing the culture in an organization, such as the police department, is that screening, lived experience, thorough background check. The military goes back 7 years.
Yeah.
Right. They check your background for 7 years. They do extensive interviews. They call the neighbors.
All the things.
They do all those
it's
things.
Extraordinarily thorough. I'm so glad you shared that. And I can't pretend to know with what rigor that happens with police officers. I honestly don't know.
Right.
But I just have to believe, just based on what I also know to be true about the Black experience, Black and brown experience specifically with policing, and how disproportionately that feels more oppressive than it should. So I have to believe that there is something awry with that assessment process.
And then probably the assessment, and then my other part is, once something goes astray, you have to
deal with it.
You have to deal with it immediately.
Right now.
Take action, because that changed the culture. But I also believe you do have to get people, you have to hire people from the community that are comfortable in the community. And they're not scared of the community.
Right.
Right. So that's something different. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's Louisville Police Department, right? Give me another organization that you would like to work with that you think might need some help.
I'd like to work with the entire city of Louisville.
Okay.
I mean, and I'm not talking about city government. I'm talking about just kind of a resetting of our brand. I'd love for there to be something akin to a public-private partnership where we've got city leaders from every corner of Louisville working with the chamber, working with the mayor's office, working with the foundations, a smattering of these leaders who are unilaterally, uniformly anchored to forever resetting who Louisville is on the issue of safety and race.
Okay.
I mean, I would love to see that.
I want to throw in health in there too, because health
is
oh, you know, it's all the way down here.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, all of it. I mean, I think that our brand, the reality of what it means to be a Louvillian is just kind of slipping away from us.
Okay.
And there's not enough focus, in my opinion, especially from our leaders. I'll say our white leaders specifically, who I'm more disappointed in these days than not. Partly because I am struck by the silence that I've heard, I guess, following the DOJ report.
Right.
So I've heard nothing from our business community. I've heard nothing from our philanthropic community, nothing from our banking community, nothing really from the white community leadership on what does this mean for our ability to recruit the very population that I know that we're going to have to be able to recruit and retain in this city, a city that's already struggling with black bleed. We already turn over black talent, that especially talent that's imported here, has a very difficult time finding a reason to stay here because we're so segregated and all the mindset and ideology that comes from living in a segregated city. And now on top of that, we're also known as a city that basically is open season on black folks with our police department and super unsafe now with this most recent tragic shooting. And then we don't, I mean, just the basic infrastructure around black economic empowerment is non-existent here. And there really isn't much of an appetite. I even don't, I mean, not to complain necessarily, but, you know, I have a hard time selling my products and services here in Louisville. I mean, Louisville doesn't buy what I sell. And so it's an incredibly myopic city to our detriment. So I would just love to be a part of helping to convene almost a new world order for how Louisville presents itself.
So we need a bullhorn. We have to get on the loudspeaker. We have to continue to bring these issues to the forefront because Louisville will become silent.
Yep.
Because it doesn't impact other races. Right?
Yeah.
So I always say if this impacts whites the same, then we might hear more. And that's part of the issue and probably a greater problem in the country because people don't have the appetite for change. Changing is scary to people.
Of course, yeah.
Right? Because they don't want to be revolutionaries in Louisville to create a change. Everybody's sort of comfortable in their neighborhood until it spills over. Just like with mass shootings, right? It's not impacting enough people. When it does, it hits the right person, the right neighborhood, at the right time, then change will come. Right now, we're talking about, hey, we don't want to lose our Second Amendment rights to carry assault weapons, which the only time I would carry an assault weapon is at war, right?
Right.
Because anybody could pick up an assault weapon and spray.
Yeah.
That has no intent.
Right.
Right? People are just innocent bystanders. Handgun has a little bit more intent, right?
Yeah.
But until it impacts the right person.
Yeah.
Right? So,
well, and I think that's why part of what it would be incumbent upon a lot of us to reframe the question, reframe the way that we talk about this work. So racism as an example.
Right.
Impacts everybody.
It does.
Everybody loses with racism.
Right.
White people too. But they've never been taught that. We don't teach them why that's the case. I talk about it in terms of the economic impacts of it. But also there's just like real societal issues of who can and cannot be friends and who can and cannot marry without somebody getting side-eyed and what is it robbed from us in terms of just the basic human-to-human collisions that should be able to happen organically without having to worry about and try to, you know, work through the narratives around all of that.
Well, I'm just say this. I'm often appalled when I see some of the issues with race. And just because I literally sit down and smoke cigars with friends from all walks of life, different parts of the world, right? And it's a very rich conversation all the time. I could pick up any one of my friends. Nobody would be shocked. But yet, when I come to segregated cities, that don't exist. And nobody wants to cross the line. Nobody wants that change. But I think you have a great solution in bringing together public and private partnership. And I will support you in having forums because we need to have that dialogue. I think Louisville can be better than where it is now. And I want to see it thriving like Nashville.
Right.
Right. So we sort of missed the boat on Nashville. We didn't know Nashville was going to grow like that.
Yeah.
And now Louisville is at a very peculiar spot.
But it starts with both the city from the government standpoint and from private sector coming together and saying Black economic empowerment is important to us. It's important to our growth. Like me, I'm hard pressed to think of really anyone in our city who would even say that out loud other than Black folks.
Right.
But that's what it starts with. It's like making that decision and then building infrastructure around it.
So if the mayor says it, then it'll happen.
It probably wouldn't.
Because that's the political muster. If he says it.
If the mayor says it, it will happen in a perfunctory way, I think. People will honor and oblige our mayor out of respect for him, much in the same way that our previous mayor he'd made similar statements. Right. And then he had to figure out how to build a little bit of infrastructure around it inside of government, because private sector was just like,
we don't want to touch it. So we got work to do.
Yeah.
So thank you for coming.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure.
This concludes my show for today. Have a wonderful weekend. And just final note, my condolences to the families and the people impacted by the mass shooting last week. Thank you.